Boop! Happy Thursday. Today is Thursday, July the 21st, 2022. Today's daily Bible readings come to us from Psalm 85, Hosea 4, 1 through 19, and Acts 1, 15 through 20. Or you could read the complementary texts, which are Psalm 138, Esther 2, 19 through 3, 6, and then Acts 1, 15 through 20. I'm going to take a look at Hosea and just talk about the indictment. So, like when a prosecutor decides a crime's been committed, and they sent out a legal document, right there, that describes the crime, describes who they think did the crime, and then charges the person with the crime. Prophets they did that kind of same thing. I think I've said this before. You almost think of them like the district attorney or the prosecutor for God. They go out and when a crime has been committed, when the people have stepped out of line, the part of the job of the prophet is to go out and read out the indictment and talk about what the accusation is, what the evidence is, what the punishment is going to be. And that's what we have here. Thankfully, there's also usually words of encouragement. In other words, you've been doing this. I don't like it. Going to punish you. But if you'll stop doing that, things will get better. Sometimes it's even like, if you'll stop doing that completely, I'll not do this. Hosea, we have God having Hosea the prophet read out this indictment. A matter of fact, he says it. He says right at the beginning in chapter 4, verse 1, he says, "Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel, for the Lord has an indictment against the inhabitants of the land." He's not even calling them his people anymore. They're just the people who live in the land, because that's really kind of the way things are going. They're not being his people. They just happen to live on the land that he gave their predecessors. So what's the problem? It's a problem, first of all, with the people. It's not simply just what they're doing. It's like he gets to the core of it. There's a problem with you and who you are. That's why you're being the way you are. And the problem is there's no knowledge of God. And there's no faithfulness, there's no loyalty. That's what he says. That's what's going on in this land. There's no loyalty, there's no faithfulness, there's no knowledge of God among these people. And what is the result of that? Well, he gives us this list. And it sounds very much like something we hear later, like in Galatians, where Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit versus the works of the flesh. It sounds like the works of the flesh. He says there's swearing, lying, murder, stealing, adultery. All these things break out, and then bloodshed follows bloodshed. And it's tied to this lack of knowledge of God. The people don't seem to have a knowledge of God, and they don't, and it's not knowledge, right? And he says there's no knowledge. It's not knowledge, once again, of, like they haven't gone to class and studied math and science, all these things. It's specifically, they don't know God. They don't know who God is. They don't know God's will. Because if you don't know God and you don't know who he is, you can't really know his will. So the result, once again, is swearing, lying, murder, stealing, adultery. All these things have broken out in the land, and then bloodshed follows. And it's so bad, we're told, that it even has spread to the land itself. Therefore, the land mourns. This is an interesting idea, and you see this elsewhere in the prophets and in the Old Testament. I think it's Chronicles ends with the people going off into captivity, after the people of Judea going off into captivity, after their punishment has finally come, and it says, "And the land rests," because they were such a burden on it. So it says, "Therefore the land mourns; all who live in it languish, together with the wild animals and the birds of the air, even the fish of the sea are perishing." And I said a couple of days ago, like, I really need to do a study on how environmental collapse is a fruit of human disobedience and human sinfulness, because you see it all the time. And this, this sounds like the whole list of things that we have going on now. So just gonna leave that there. But that's how bad it's gotten. Even the land, the rest of the creatures, they all suffer. And the people themselves suffer, because the land is failing, right? The land is not going to support them in the manner they've become accustomed to. And it's all because of the prophet says the people's sinful ways and because of their ignorance. So who is to blame for all this? Yeah, the people are ignorant and they're doing horrible, horrible things. The people, he says, are destroyed for lack of knowledge. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. But who is the peoples that are supposed to be maintaining that knowledge? Who are supposed to be giving that knowledge? Well, it's the priests and the prophets. Um, they stumble in darkness. He says, "O priest, you shall stumble by day, and the prophet also shall stumble with you by night." Um, the priests and the prophets, they're the ones who are responsible for making sure the people know God, maintaining knowledge of God. The priests, through the practice of worship, of regular practice of worship, that's how they do it. The prophets, by literally sharing the word of God, like Hosea is doing. They but the problem is they have abandoned knowledge, and not just that they've abandoned it, like thought, oh, well, we forgot it was there. So we kind of were on our own devices. No, they rejected. They rejected knowledge, specifically the knowledge of God and that comes from God. They rejected God. They'd rather consult, we see later on in this section, they'd rather consult with, chunks of wood and with their divining rods, with spirits, right? Because divining rods are supposed to be controlled, by spirits. They'd rather do all that divination than contend with God and come to knowledge of Him. That's what they'd rather do. And so as a consequence, the people and the priests, but they've forgotten God. And so God says that He's going to forget them, and He just leaves them to their greediness. He leaves them to cope with a world that's fallen apart around them because they would not know God. Anyway, that's the DBR. Get out, enjoy the day, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Boop.